Greetings, Remnant Church and online spiritual travelers. Welcome to another Midweek Refuel, where we seek out the ancient paths in order to find the narrow road that leads to the Christ mind and the Christ life now and forever. I'm Pastor John Widdifield of Remnant Church in Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina, and it's an honor to have you with us as we partake of the absolutely highest endeavor of humankind, the longing to understand God. I recently broke my ankle, so I'm working from a slightly smaller studio in which I can easily manage take up and take down. I thank you for your prayers. God has already blessed me tremendously, and the orthopedic doctor says that as far as he was concerned, I won the lottery as far as broken ankles go. Understanding God is a task that will take forever. And still, as we're on just the shore of forever, it will only scratch the surface of God thought. It is important to understand the limits of our own understanding if we are to do theology properly. One example I heard was that the created cannot understand the creator. It was as though a bunch of jars of jelly were on a shelf, and the jelly started talking to each other and said, well, what shape is jelly? And all the jelly went, well, jelly is, of course, cylindrical, or the shape of a mason jar. They didn't know any better. They couldn't know any better. If we ever complete our mental image of God, we have probably constructed an idol and should take a hammer and axe to it as soon as possible. God is undefinable. God is unpredictable. He is unknowable, and he is invisible. These things are supported in Scripture. And yet, he is also willing, according to Scripture, to enter into a relationship with us and to even submit to death, of which we ourselves are the only rightful heirs and recipients. He is unmovable, and yet the Scripture displays him as being intimately moved by the sin and error of his creation. He is everywhere, and still he becomes present in absence. He is the beginning, and he is the end. He is everything, and yet everything is at the same time far removed from him. This is spiritual language, and it beckons you on to entertain thoughts of God that will stretch your God-given ability to exercise faith, and to, with that faith, actually affect the world that is around you. As Christians, we gird up our minds against the sarx, or the flesh mind, but God thought literally stretches the mind to its antipodes. God thought is healthy. God thought is very healthy. Well, it's healthy except for when it isn't. We have learned that Augustine was first involved with the Manichaean mystery religion, and that was God thought. And then he was drawn to the philosophies of the Neoplatonist, which is God thought mixed with philosophy, or philosophical constructs, or launching points. The section that we read today is absolutely drenched in philosophical and religious systems, which have much more to do with how a Gnostic who becomes born again, who actually meets the Lord and receives Christ's likeness, or mind, might need to interpret the world. This person, because of their background, might need to interpret the world like that for a time, while the renewing of the mind, or the deconstructing of their own tainted sin worldview, or more simply, learning how to view the world as Christ views the world, and through the lens of Christ himself. None of us come to Christ with perfect theologies. I've spent a lifetime trying to make sure that I not only accept Orthodox thought, but that Orthodox thought dictates how I pick up my cross and how I follow my King. But this I know. Like the lady who had the issue of blood, who thinks there's some magical power in the tassels of the passing rabbi, most of our thoughts about God and theology are going to be revealed in eternity as childish meanderings, perhaps worthy of the Father's refrigerator, but not much else, really. Theology takes a bit of humility. for you will always be in need of asking for humility in the depth of rich thought, and you will have to ask forgiveness for the poverty of that very same thought. You discover and submit to the fact that the very thing which puffeth up was really hot air all along, and you knew it. I'll never forget a particular ordination service that I attended many years ago. A pastor who was being ordained there asked his grandfather, also a pastor, to pray over him before the ceremony. The old man, unbalanced on his cane, walked up on the platform and began what I expected to be a long and bloated prayer. But he surprised me. For much of modern Christianity is vanity and pride, and we've come to expect it. But as he prayed, quote, "I've lived a long time, I have worried about much, and this is the wisdom I have for you. Love your neighbor as yourself and pick up your cross and follow me. Glory to the King who thought me worthy to teach me the rich things of the kingdom." Unquote. The deeper into theology I go, the more like a child I know I must be to even understand the simplest of Christ's riddles. I say all that to let you know that, well, today I disagree with Augustine in this section just a bit. But that being said, I also want to say his concept of good and evil sustained my intellect for years as God brought me to deeper waters and better things. I do not put my hands on my hips and stick my lip out at Augustine. Heaven forbid. Had I not read him early in life, I would have spent a lifetime mapping out the very same roads. We stand on these philosophers and these theologians' shoulders. And to think we would be ahead of them without them is to really have a bloated concept of self. And worst of all, at least to me, is the knowledge that my thought now, even while standing on Augustine's shoulders, is still the laughing stock of the angels and the sneering grin of demons. When you find that the exercise of God thought is more important than ever finding an actual terminus or a resolution, then you will begin to understand the God that wills each moment to us as a gift that we receive as time washes over us like waves and nourishment from the throne of God himself. Each moment, a gifting, a free gifting. Why do I disagree with Augustine? Well, it really isn't worth getting into. And to be honest, you don't really want me to at this point. I tend to split hairs. It's who I am, and a little bit of OCD. I have mentioned before that I'm also a radical orthodox, and this decision to embrace reality through the restriction and fences and the liberating freedom of orthodox belief has opened fairyland up to the child within once again, and I'll never step foot back into the house of C.S. Lewis's steward of the law. Augustine, at the end of the day, for my particular taste, at this particular time, relies far too much on intellectual conformity to the philosophical strictures of his time than on simple faith in the revealed truth. Now, I understand that some of you are thinking, Pastor, it should make sense, shouldn't it? Our theology shouldn't be fearful of the scientific method, should they? We really should restrain our God thought to logical structures that conform to scientifically proven strictures, shouldn't we, Pastor? And to be honest with you, I can't deny that I like all that to be true of most of what I believe. But here is where I step out of that box of thought. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. God tore the Tower of Babel down because we could do anything we imagined, but we were also filled with evil intent all the time. He couldn't allow it for our own good. Look around at the world you live in. The internet is Babel rebuilt. Much of what we can imagine now actually exists and probably will exist soon. It isn't that I don't like and appreciate science. I do. It is, but it's rather that I believe science to be an instrument with which to measure a very small part of the reality pie. It'd be like running around with a thermometer saying that you could sense infrared light. You can maybe get the heat off the infrared, but you can't sense infrared with an old-time thermometer. You were using the wrong tool. The tool is right tool in the right place. That's what I think of science. Elisha's servant, we're told in the scripture, and many of us have had supernatural encounters that we cannot explain. But Elisha's servant saw the flaming armies of God when his spiritual eyes were open. John the Revelator watched the absolute universal redemption story as it unfolded in the spiritual realities. Paul was called to third heaven, and you, dear friend, can know the unknowable God who was and is to come. Augustine does give us a nice, simple way of thinking about evil until we find a better system, so we should use it while we're looking for a better system. Augustine thinks of evil as something that doesn't have substance or is without substance, non-entity. Everything God made is good. It says that in Genesis. It was good, it was good, it was good, it was very good. Therefore, God did not make evil, right? If evil exists, it exists as a non-existence to Augustine. Darkness is the absence of light, not a thing in and of itself. You get a flash light, not a flash dark. Therefore, evil is the absence of good, not a thing in and of itself. The further you get from the light, the darker that moment becomes for you. The further from God, the more corrupted by nothingness you become. This is, I hope, Augustine's thought. I'm hoping not reading more or less into it either way. The further from soul or spirit that you get, the closer to animal and beast that you get. It's a very simple way to look around at the world around you and see what's happening. We've become very bestial. And someone might be thinking, well, Pastor, what about dark matter? And if you're thinking nobody's thinking that, I had somebody in a class one time ask me, what about dark matter, Pastor? And I'm thinking to myself, don't overthink an example. That's how I got this weird, so buyer beware, So that's on you. In the famous poem by Parmenides, the author comes to a fork in the road, like a Y, a choice, and yet no choice at all. The path broke between existence and non-existence. And because a step in either direction only brings you to an identical decision in the very next moment, because the Ouroboros eats its own tail, because Medusa cannot be killed while looking at her, there must be a third way which Persephone has hidden from mortal eyes. A reflective surface from which one can aim at the Gorgon must be present, a shield in which to trick the system and actually see. That image, that reflection, is the invisible God, made visible in the person of Jesus Christ. I give you a mystery. Let's read today a selection, book 7, chapters 11-17, and then I just want to leave you with a simple question to ponder after that reading, a question that shares more in common with the Sphinx than with the Academy. I considered, too, the remaining things, those that are beneath you, and I saw that they did not entirely exist or not exist. They existed inasmuch as they were from you, but they did not exist inasmuch as they were not what you are. The truly existent is that which abides unchangeable. For me, it is good to cleave to God, since if I do not abide in him, I cannot abide in myself. But he abides in himself and makes all things new. And you are my Lord, for you need none of my goods. It was revealed to me also that it is good things that are corrupted. They could not be corrupted if they were supreme goods, nor unless they were good. If they were supreme goods, they would be incorruptible, whereas if they were not good at all, there would be nothing in them to be corrupted. Corruption damages, and it would not damage if the good were not diminished. Therefore, either corruption does not damage at all, which is impossible, or all things that are corrupted are deprived of good, which is most certain. But if they are deprived of all good, they surely do not exist at all. The things that exist and are incapable of corruption are assuredly better things, for they will remain incorruptible. And what could be more impious than to say that things become better when they have lost all good? All that is then is good. As for evil, whose origin I was seeking, it is not a substance, since if it were a substance, it would be good. For as a substance, it would either be incorruptible, in which case it would be a great good, or corruptible, but it could not be corrupted if it were not good. Thus I saw, and thus it was revealed to me, that it is you who have made all good things, and that there are no substances at all that you have not made. The reason why they all exist is that you have not made them all the same. Individually, they are good, and altogether they are very good, for our God made all things to be very good. For you, there is no evil at all. And not for you only, but for all your creation. For outside you there is nothing which could erupt upon and corrupt the order you have set on creation. In parts of creation, however, there are some things that are not appropriate to those parts, and for that reason are thought evil. But these same things are themselves appropriate to other parts, and are good both in that respect and in themselves. And all these things that are not appropriate to each other are appropriate to the lower part of the universe that we call earth. Earth, that has its own sky, full as it is of clouds and wind, but fitting to itself. Far be it from me to say now, would that these things did not exist. For if I were to contemplate them alone, I would indeed long for better things. But as it is, I am bound to praise you even for these. Dragons and all deeps, fire, hail, snow, ice, stormy winds, that do your word, mountains and all hills, fruitful trees and all cedars, all beasts, wild and tame, creeping things and winged birds, proclaim on earth your praiseworthiness. Kings of the earth and all peoples, princes and all judges of the world, young men and maidens, old men and children, praise your name. But in heaven also may you, our God, be praised. Let all your angels praise you in the highest. Let all your hosts, the sun and the moon, all stars and light, the heaven of heavens and the waters that are above the heavens, praise your name. I did not now long for better things, for I pondered on all things. And I now considered the better things to be higher indeed than the lower ones, but with my judgment somewhat healed, I held the whole to be better than the higher things alone. But there is no healing for those who are displeased at some part of your creation, just as there was none for me, as long as I was displeased at many of the things you have made. And since my soul did not venture to be displeased at my God, it refused to believe that anything that displeased it was of you. Hence it strayed into its theory of the two substances, found no rest, and spoke other men's words. On its way back from there, it had fashioned for itself a god with infinite spatial extension, supposed that deity to be you, and set up in its heart, becoming once again the temple of its own idol, an abomination before you. But when, without my knowledge, you stroked my head and closed my eyes lest they see vanity, I stood back from myself for a short while. My madness slept, and I awoke in you. And I saw that you were infinite in a different sense, and this vision did not come to me through the flesh. I turned my sight to other things and saw that they owe their being to you, and that in you all things are finite, but in a different sense, not finite in place. But because you hold all things in your hand, they are bounded by truth. All things are true insofar as they exist, nor is there any falsehood, except when something is thought to exist that does not. I saw, too, that everything is appropriate not only to its place, but to its time, and that you, who alone are eternal, did not begin to work after an unmeasurable space of time, for all spaces of time, both those that have passed by and those that will pass by, would neither come nor go were you not working and abiding. I realize, too, from my own experience, that bread is a torture to a sick palate, but a pleasure to a healthy one, and that weak eyes hate the light that sound eyes love. To the wicked, even your justice is displeasing. Much more so the viper and the worm. The good things that you have created, which are well fitted to the lower parts of your creation, to which the wicked themselves are well fitted in proportion as they are unlike you, whereas they are fitted to the higher parts in proportion as they become more like you. I sought to know what wickedness was, and found it was no substance, but a perverse distortion of the will away from the highest substance and towards the lowest things. The will casts forth its innermost part and swells outward. I was full of wonder that I now loved you, not some illusion instead of you. I did not, however, stand fast in the enjoyment of my God, but was borne up to you by your harmonious beauty, and soon borne down away from you by my own weight, and fell back to these lower things with a groan. And this weight was that of my carnal habits. But the memory of you remained with me, nor did I have any doubt that you existed for me to cleave to. Rather, I thought that I did not exist in such a state as to cleave to you. For the body, being corruptible, weighs down the soul, and the earthly dwelling place overwhelms the mind that thinks on many things. I was wholly certain that from the foundation of the world your invisible nature has been apprehended and perceived through the things you have made, both your eternal strength and your divinity. I sought to know why I thought good the beauty of physical objects, whether in the heavens or on earth, and what it was that helped me judge correctly when I said of mutable objects, this thing ought to be such and such, but that thing so and so. As I asked the question of why I judged thus, seeing that I did judge thus, I had found an eternity of truth, unchangeable and true, that was above my changeable mind. So it was that gradually I was led from bodily objects to the soul that through the body perceives them, and thence to the inner faculty of the soul to which the body's senses report what is outside. Thus far the beast also can comprehend, but from there I proceeded further to the ratiocinative power to which the soul brings for judgment what it receives from the bodily senses. This ratiocinative power, finding that within me it was itself changeable, lifted itself up to the level of its own understanding and removed my thoughts from their usual paths. It took itself away from the crowd of contradictory illusions to find what light was cast upon it when it unhesitatingly proclaimed that the unchangeable was to be preferred to the changeable, and how it knew the unchangeable itself. For if it did not know the unchangeable, at least to some degree, there was no way in which it could with certainty prefer the unchangeable to the unchangeable. My soul went on, and in the twinkling of an eye attained to that which is. Then at last I apprehended and perceived your invisible nature through the things you have made, but I could not fix my gaze on them. My weakness was driven back from it, and I was returned to familiar things, and I carried in me only a loving memory of it, like the desire for things I had smelt, but did not yet have the strength to eat. So, you decide. Is Augustine right by saying, quote, "As for evil, whose origin I was seeking, it is not a substance, since if it were a substance, it would be good," unquote? Or, like me, do you think God made everything, even the things that make me very uncomfortable with him at times? But I have learned to trust him. So I think there is probably a third way, a narrow way between the two extremes, and few there are that find it. A way only children can see. Christ is King. Hail to the King.